Imagine a nation that's running at two completely different speeds.
Okay.
In one lane, the fast lane, you have the GDP numbers just soaring. You've got smart cities rising out of the dust, industrial output breaking records.
Right, the shining India narrative.
Exactly, the one we see on the news all the time. But then you look in the rearview mirror, and in the very shadow of those brand new skyscrapers, you have regions where time seems to have just stopped. Poverty is actually getting deeper. Rivers are turning into, well, toxic sludge. And entire communities are just being left behind in the dust.
It is the ultimate paradox of our times, isn't it?
It really is. And it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. One that might even be, considered dangerous in some policy circles.
And what's that?
Does development actually create crises?
That is the question of the hour. We tend to equate development with modernization, concrete, big dams, fast cars, digital payments.
Right. Progress.
We call it progress. But if that growth comes at the cost of social justice, if it widens the gap between the rich and the poor, or if it poisons the land so badly that future generations can't even farm it, is that really development?
Or is it something else?
Or is it just destruction wearing a fancy suit?
That's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Welcome back to another deep dive.
It's great to be here.
And this isn't just any discussion. This is a special edition, custom tailored for the listeners of the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel.
It is. And today we have a very, very specific mission. We're taking a huge stack of sources, specifically the NCERT Class 12 India People and Economy textbook, Chapter 9, and we are going to deconstruct it.
We're covering planning and sustainable development in Indian context. But before we dive into the weeds of policy and irrigation and ecology, I have a humble request for everyone listening.
Please.
We're trying to build something sustainable here, too. So to help us improve retention and, frankly, keep the ship sailing, please hit that subscribe button on Simplified UPSC by PPP.
Absolutely. And look, if you are capable, and if you find real value in this kind of rigorous, no-nonsense analysis that respects your intelligence, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon.
It truly keeps the lights on.
It really does. It lets us do the deep research, edit the scripts, and bring you this high-utility content without cutting any corners.
And a massive shout-out to our existing supporters. You folks are the real MVPs. Also, don't forget to like the video and leave a comment.
We actually read them.
We do. And they help the algorithm find other serious learners just like you who need this material.
And one more crucial resource alert before we get into the heavy lifting. I know everyone worries about notes. Did I write that down? Did I miss that date?
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry. Free notes with practice previous year questions, the PYQs, they're available right now on the public Telegram channel.
However, if you want the premium experience, and I'm talking about having all the videos in this series at once, organized premium notes, detailed summaries, extra PYQs, and crucially, the model mains answers, you need to join the private Telegram library.
And I have to say, those model mains answers are worth their weight in gold for this chapter. This isn't just about reading a book.
No.
It's about learning how to write the answer that gets you the marks. All you have to do is DM us on the public Telegram channel to get access to the private library.
Okay, housekeeping done. Let's get into the meat of it. Chapter 9. Planning.
Planning.
It sounds so dry, doesn't it? Planning? I mean, I plan my weekend, I plan my grocery list, but in the context of a nation like India with, 1.4 billion people?
Yeah.
What are we actually talking about here? It has to be more complex than a grocery list.
Just a little bit. In the economic context, planning isn't just, making a to-do list. It's a really systematic process.
Okay.
It involves thinking, then formulating a scheme or a program, and this is always the hard part.
The implementation.
The implementation. A set of actions to achieve a very, very specific goal.
So it's the exact opposite of just winging it.
Exactly. The NCERT explicitly differentiates it from what it calls hit-and-miss methods. You don't just hope the economy grows. You don't just, hope the poor get richer.
You try to engineer it.
You engineer it. You evolve strategies. And in India, this has historically been a very centralized process. We had the Planning Commission.
Right, the Planning Commission, a statutory body headed by the Prime Minister. That brings back memories of, high school civics class.
It should. It gave us the 5-year plans, starting with the first 5-year plan way, way back in 1951.
Now, I know what some of our listeners are probably thinking, but wait, didn't we scrap that for Niti Aayog?
That's the question.
Yeah, isn't the Planning Commission dead? Why are we studying a ghost?
The institution has changed, yes. Niti Aayog is here. But the concepts of planning that are discussed in this chapter, They are still the absolute bedrock of how the Indian economy functions.
So the philosophy is still relevant.
Incredibly so. In fact, if you look at the prelims 2013 paper, there was a specific question about the National Development Council, or the NDC.
I see that in the notes here. The question asks if the NDC is an organ of the Planning Commission.
Precisely. And knowing the institutional framework helps you answer those factual questions. But for this chapter, we need to move beyond just who sits in the chair.
We need to understand the how.
We need to understand the types of planning. The text breaks it down into two major approaches: sectoral planning and regional planning.
Okay, let's break those down. Sectoral seems pretty straightforward. It's about sectors, right?
Exactly. Think of the economy as a giant pie, and you cut it into slices.
Okay.
You have your agriculture slice, your irrigation slice, manufacturing, power, transport, communications. Sectoral planning means you're formulating schemes specifically for one of those slices.
And you give me an example.
Sure. You might have a plan just to boost electricity generation across the country, or a plan dedicated to modernizing the railways. You're focusing on the activity, not necessarily the location.
So if you build a new national highway, that's sectoral planning for the transport sector.
You've got it. The logic is you fix the sector, and the whole economy benefits from that.
That's the theory anyway.
That is the theory. But there's a massive, massive problem with that. India isn't a uniform flatland. You can't just apply the same agriculture plan to a fertile alluvial plain in Punjab and a rocky, dry hill in the northeast.
Right. A tractor that works perfectly in Punjab might be totally useless on a terraced slope in Mizoram.
Exactly.
Or a seed variety that needs flood irrigation in Bengal will just wither and die in the sands of Rajasthan.
Exactly right. And that is where regional planning comes into the picture. This is the spatial perspective.
The where.
The where. It's the realization that development is not uniform. Some areas are naturally rich, maybe they have coal or they have really good soil and water. Other areas are lagging behind.
And the goal of regional planning is to fix that.
The goal is to draw up specific plans to reduce these regional imbalances.
So it's like trying to level the playing field. You are literally looking at the map, seeing the dark spots where development hasn't reached, and saying, okay, we need a special plan for here.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us to a major pivot point in Indian economic history.
What's that?
We spent about 15 years doing heavy planning, mostly sectoral, building the dams, building the steel plants, the temples of modern India.
Right.
And the experts looked at the data and they realized something pretty alarming. The regional disparities, they weren't going away.
They weren't, after all that investment.
No. In fact, in many cases, they were getting worse.
Worse? How was that possible?
The rich regions were getting richer and backward regions were, for the most part, staying backward.
But why? I thought the prevailing economic theory back then was trickle down. If you pump money into the economy, build a factory, build a dam, that wealth eventually trickles down to everybody.
That was the hope. That was the textbook theory. But the NCERT is very blunt about this. It says trickle down didn't work.
Just didn't work.
It explicitly mentions that even resource-rich regions can remain backward if they lack the right technology and investment.
That feels so counterintuitive. If a region has, say, a lot of minerals, shouldn't it be rich by default?
Not necessarily. I mean, look at Jharkhand or Odisha historically, huge mineral wealth, but also historically very high poverty rates.
Right.
Just having the stuff isn't enough. You need the infrastructure, you need the technology, the education, the social capital to actually use it for local benefit.
Yeah.
If you just extract the minerals and ship them out to a port, the region itself doesn't develop.
The wealth just gets exported.
Exactly. So seeing this failure, the Planning Commission shifted gears. This is when they introduced the target area and target group approaches.
Okay, let's parse those terms because they sound a bit like jargon. Target area and target group. What's the difference between them?
It's pretty much in the name. Target group programs focus on specific people who are being left behind, regardless of where they happen to live. The text lists the Small Farmers Development Agency, or SFDA, and the Marginal Farmers Development Agency, MFDA.
So you are identifying the struggling farmer, the person with just 1 acre of land, and you're targeting him directly with a scheme. It doesn't matter if he's in Punjab or Bihar.
Right.
If he fits the criteria, he gets the help.
Correct. You are fixing the person's economic situation. On the other hand, target area programs focus on a specific geography that is suffering.
So you're fixing the place.
You're fixing the place. The book lists things like the Command Area Development Program, Drought-Prone Area Development, Desert Development, and Hill Area Development Programs.
You are basically acknowledging that the place itself has inherent disadvantages. Maybe it's too dry, maybe it's too hilly and remote, and that place needs a specific prescription.
That's it exactly. And the text notes that in the 8th five-year plan, there was a specific design for infrastructure in hill areas, the Northeast, and tribal areas. It became much more focused.
Let's dig into some of these specific programs, because I know the UPSC loves to ask about the nitty-gritty criteria. They love those little factual traps in the prelims questions.
They do.
So let's talk about the Hill Area Development Program.
A classic example of target area planning. It was initiated during the 5th five-year plan. It covered 15 districts places in what was then Uttar Pradesh, now Uttaranchal, Assam, West Bengal, and the Nilgiris down in Tamil Nadu.
Was there a specific cutoff? I mean, how did they decide what officially counts as a hill area? Does someone just look at a map and say, yep, that looks bumpy?
No, it was a bit more scientific than that. There was a committee, the National Committee on the Development of Backward Areas in 1981.
Okay.
And they recommended that all hill areas having a height above 600 meters, that is the magic number, 600 meters, and which were not already covered under the tribal subplans, be treated as backward hill areas.
600 meters. Listeners, write that down. Put a big circle around it. That smells like a classic prelim statement trap.
It absolutely does.
Statement 1. The Hill Area Development Program covers areas above 1,000 meters. And boom, it's false. It's 600.
Exactly. You have to catch those little details.
So once they identified these areas above 600 meters, what was the plan? Was it just about building roads up the mountains?
Roads were a huge part of it, of course. You can't develop a hill if you can't get up it. But the core strategy was about harnessing indigenous resources.
Indigenous meaning what was already there.
What was already there. They looked at the local ecosystem and said, what works here? So horticulture, plantation agriculture, animal husbandry, poultry, forestry.
So not trying to force heavy industry onto a fragile ecosystem.
Absolutely not. You don't build a massive steel plant in the Nilgiris. You grow tea. You grow spices. You use the hill's natural advantages rather than trying to fight against the terrain.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what about the flip side of that? Not the high wet areas, but the low dry ones. The Drought-Prone Area Program.
This one started a bit earlier, back in the 4th five-year plan. And initially, the objective was basically survival.
Just keeping people afloat.
Pretty much. Providing employment to people in these drought-prone areas and creating some productive assets. It started with very labor-intensive civil works.
Like digging ditches or building small check dams.
Essentially, think of it strictly as famine relief. Giving people a wage so they don't starve when the crops fail. But over time, the program evolved.
How so?
They realized just digging holes wasn't going to solve the root problem. So it shifted towards irrigation projects, land development programs, afforestation, and building up rural infrastructure, roads, electricity, markets.
But the text mentions a critique of this program too, doesn't it?
Yes, and this is really important for your critical analysis and a mains answer. The National Committee on Development of Backward Areas, the same group who did the hill areas, they noted that the program was too confined to agriculture.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning, if you live in a drought-prone area, relying solely on agriculture is incredibly risky. It's a gamble you will often lose. If the rain fails, the farm fails.
So if your whole development plan is just, let's make better farms, you aren't really solving the fundamental risk.
You're not. You're just making the gamble a little bit better. So what's the alternative?
There has to be one.
Ecological restoration. The text emphasizes that the strategy has to focus on restoring the ecological balance between water, soil, plants, and the human and animal populations.
So it's a systems approach.
It's a systems approach. It's not just about growing crops. It's about fixing the broken ecosystem. Things like watershed development, pasture land development.
And geographically, where are we talking about? Which parts of India?
We're talking about the semi-arid and arid regions. So large parts of Rajasthan, Gujarat, western Madhya Pradesh, the Marathwada region of Maharashtra, Telangana, the Karnataka Plateau.
Wait a minute, I'm looking at the map in my head. What about Punjab and Haryana? I mean, they're semi-arid too, technically. Why aren't they on that list?
That is a very good catch. The text explicitly notes that Punjab, Haryana, and North Rajasthan are largely protected from this classification. One word: irrigation. The massive spread of irrigation from the canal systems, they effectively engineered their way out of the drought-prone status.
For better or for worse?
Right.
I have a feeling we'll come back to that when we talk about the canal later.
We certainly will.
But first, I want to zoom in. We've talked about these broad programs, hill areas, drought areas. Now, I want a story. The text gives us this fascinating case study about the Bharmaur region.
This is one of the most useful case studies for the exam.
Yeah.
Seriously. It touches on tribal issues, regional planning, and social indicators all at once. It's a gold mine.
So set the scene for us. Where is Bharmaur? What's the context?
It's in the Chamba district of Himachal Pradesh. It's a designated tribal region, and it's inhabited by a community called the Gadis.
The Gadis. They're a transhumant community, aren't they? They migrate with their livestock.
Historically, yes. They practice transhumance. It's a seasonal migration. They move their sheep and goats up to the high pastures in the summer and then back down to the valleys in the winter. They speak their own Gadi dialect. And for a very long time, they were experiencing deep geographical and political isolation.
And isolation is a killer for development.
It really is. They were socioeconomically deprived, living in a very harsh climate, with a basic economy based on subsistence agriculture and rearing sheep and goats. They were effectively cut off from the Indian growth story.
So how did the government intervene? What was the plan?
In the 1970s, the Gadis were officially included in the list of scheduled tribes. Then, under the fifth five-year plan, the Integrated Tribal Development Project, or ITDP, was introduced in 1974.
ITDP.
Yes, and Bharmaur became one of the 5 ITDP areas in Himachal Pradesh.
What was the goal? Was it just to give them handouts and subsidies?
No, the goal was much more structural. It was, 1, to improve the quality of life, and 2, this is crucial, to narrow the development gap between Bharmaur and the rest of Himachal Pradesh. It was about integration.
And what did they prioritize to achieve that?
Transport and communications were the absolute top priority. If you can't reach the region, you can't develop it. Simple as that. Following that, they focused on agriculture and related activities and social services.
Sure.
Did it work? The results were actually quite impressive. There was a massive development of infrastructure. We're talking schools, healthcare centers, potable water, roads, electricity.
The basics.
The basics that they didn't have. But the social indicators are where it gets really interesting. Literacy rates skyrocketed. The overall literacy rate went from almost nothing to over 40%.
That's huge.
It is. The sex ratio improved. Female literacy jumped significantly, and the practice of child marriage declined.
That sounds like a massive success story, a textbook win for targeted development.
It was, but,
Yeah.
and there's always a but in these case studies, isn't there?
There always is.
The benefits were uneven.
Uneven how? Spatially.
Exactly. Spatially. The villages that were located near the Ravi River, specifically in the Holi and Kani areas, they were the main beneficiaries. They got the best infrastructure first because they were just more accessible.
But what about the remote villages, the ones further up in the mountains?
The remote villages in the Tunda and Kubti areas,
Still waiting for the road.
pretty much they were still left behind. They still lack sufficient infrastructure even today.
Wow. That is a perfect example of how, even within a target area, you can still have regional imbalances. It's like a fractal pattern. You zoom in, and the inequality is still there.
Precisely. And if you are writing a mains answer, say you're looking at the 2020 or 2016 papers on regionalism or tribal development, this is the evidence you use.
This is your case study.
This is your case study. You cite the Bharmaur ITDP. You mention the success in female literacy. That shows the examiner you know the specific data. But you also mention the spatial disparity between the Holi area and the Tunda area.
And that shows you understand the nuance.
That's the difference between an average answer and a topper answer. Nuance wins marks. It shows you aren't just reciting a government brochure, you are critically analyzing the outcome.
Okay, that's a brilliant point. Let's zoom out again. We've talked about planning for specific areas, but now the text shifts gears to a much bigger, more philosophical concept: sustainable development.
This is really the philosophical heart of the chapter. It starts by questioning the very definition of development itself.
Right, because for a long, long time, development just meant one thing: economic growth.
GNP, per capita income.
If the line on the graph goes up, the country is developing. If we make more steel this year than we did last year, we are winning.
Correct. That was the post-World War II consensus. But by the 60s and 70s, experts began to realize that high economic growth could happily coexist with rising poverty, rising inequality, and rising unemployment.
You can have a rich country full of poor people.
You absolutely can, so the definition had to change.
What did it change to?
In the 1970s, you start hearing phrases like Redistribution with growth and growth in equity. Planners realize you can't just grow the pie, you have to think about how you're slicing it.
And then the environmental concern kicked the door down.
It really did. The text lists some key influences here. It mentions that the Western or Eurocentric view of development and industrialization was clashing with reality, especially in post-colonial countries.
So what were the books or reports that really changed the global conversation?
There were a few heavy hitters mentioned that every aspirant should know by name. First, The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich in 1968. That book scared everyone about overpopulation.
I've heard of that one.
Then you had The Limits to Growth by Meadows and others in 1972. That was the famous Club of Rome report.
Limits to Growth. That was the one that basically used computer models to say, hey, if we keep consuming resources at this rate, civilization is going to collapse.
Essentially, yes. It was a bombshell. It argued that infinite growth on a finite planet is a mathematical impossibility. Then, in 1974, you had E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful.
Small is Beautiful. I love that title. It's such a powerful counter-narrative to the bigger is better industrial mindset.
It is. And then the big one, the one everyone has to know, the Brundtland Report.
1987.
Yes. The World Commission on Environment and Development, which was headed by the Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland, they released their report called Our Common Future.
And this gave us the classic definition.
This gave us the definition of sustainable development that we still use today. Every single day.
Let's hear it. I know the listeners need to memorize this one verbatim for the exam.
Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs.
It sounds so simple and elegant, but it's revolutionary when you think about it. It brings intergenerational equity right into the heart of economics.
It does.
It basically says you can't eat your children's dinner.
It's a profound ethical statement. And the NCERT does a great job of connecting this back to the Indian context, too. It mentions that traditional Indian culture has always been sensitive to nature.
Right.
Mahatma Gandhi's views on austerity, on trusteeship, they are basically sustainable development before the term was even invented.
Gandhi was saying, small is beautiful, decades before Schumacher ever wrote the book.
He absolutely was. And the text also highlights that civil societies play a massive role here in pushing for peace, human development, demilitarization. It takes a very holistic view. Development isn't just factories and roads. It's peace, it's rights, it's nature.
Okay, so we have the philosophy, we have the definitions. Now let's look at the practice. Because philosophy is great, but how do you actually apply sustainable development when you have 1 billion people to feed?
Now we get to the ground reality.
And the text gives us what I'm calling the mega case study, the Indira Gandhi Canal, or the Nahar, as it's known.
This is the perfect example to illustrate the tension, the conflict between development and sustainable development. It is a story of incredible human triumph and, at the same time, ecological tragedy wrapped into one project.
So, facts first. What is this project? Give us the profile.
It is one of the largest canal systems in India. It was conceived by an engineer named Kanwar Sen way back in 1948, right after independence, and it was launched in 1958.
And where does it start?
It originates at the Harik Barrage in Punjab, at the confluence of the Sutlej and Beas rivers.
And it runs right into the desert.
Straight into the Thar Desert, the Marustali. It runs parallel to the Pakistan border for a long stretch. The total planned length, if you count all the distributaries and field channels, is over 9,000 kilometers.
9,000 kilometers? That's just mind-boggling.
It's an engineering marvel.
Yeah.
It is literally a man-made river of life flowing into a wasteland.
And the text divides the project into 2 stages. This distinction is really important for understanding the impact, right?
It's crucial. Absolutely crucial. Stage I covers Gangagar, Hanumangar, and the northern part of Bikaner district. The land there is gently undulating. It's a bit easier to farm.
Yeah.
The cultivable command area, that's the land that can theoretically be irrigated by the canal, is about 5.5 lakh hectares. Irrigation started there in the early 1960s.
And stage 2?
Stage 2 is the hardcore desert. We're talking Bikaner, Jaisalmer, Bharmaur, Jodhpur, Nagaur, Churu. This is the land of shifting sand dunes and temperatures that can hit 50 degrees Celsius.
A really hostile environment.
Incredibly hostile. In fact, the land is so uneven, they actually have to use lift canals to push the water up against the slope because gravity won't do the work for you.
So they're pumping water uphill into the desert.
That's what they're doing. The command area here is much larger, about 14 lakh hectares, and irrigation began in the mid-1980s.
So the water arrives. What happens? What is the transformation on the ground?
In the short term, it was a miracle. They literally call it greening the land. It reduced wind erosion because the soil was wet and had crops on it. It reduced siltation of the canal itself.
And the economy.
The economy was transformed. The farmers shifted from their traditional drought-resistant crops like gram, bajra, and jowar to these water-guzzling commercial crops.
Like we said before.
Wheat, cotton, groundnut, and unbelievably rice.
Rice. In the Thar Desert, that sounds profitable but insane.
It is extremely profitable. The cultivated area increased, cropping intensity went up, productivity soared, farmers got rich. But, and here comes the paradox we started this whole deep dive with, it created an ecological disaster.
The twin environmental problems.
Waterlogging and soil salinity.
Can you explain the science of that for us? Why does adding fresh water make the land salty? It seems backwards.
It does, but it's a classic problem in arid zone irrigation. It's because of intensive irrigation in a region that has very poor natural drainage and extremely high evaporation rates.
Okay.
So you flood the field for your rice crop. The water sinks down into the soil, but because the drainage is poor, the water table starts to rise up towards the surface.
It's like filling a bathtub with a slow drain.
Exactly. And as that water table rises, it dissolves the salts that are naturally present deep in the desert soil. When that salty water gets close to the surface, the intense desert sun evaporates the water.
And leaves the salt behind.
The water leaves, but the salt stays on top. It's a process called capillary action. The land becomes covered in this white, toxic crust of salt. It becomes barren.
You can't grow anything on it.
Nothing. So the very water that brought this incredible wealth is now destroying the land's ability to produce that wealth. It is the definition of unsustainable.
This is exactly what the Brundtland Report was warning about.
Yeah.
We met the needs of the present. We grew a ton of wheat and cotton in the 80s and 90s, but we compromised the ability of future generations to farm that land. Now the soil is degraded.
A perfect, tragic case study.
So is it hopeless? Should we just, I don't know, close the canal and go home?
No, that's not a real option. Millions of people depend on it now. Their entire economy is built around it. So the text proposes solutions.
Good.
It lists 7 specific measures for sustainable development in the command area. And listen, if you are taking notes for mains, put down your coffee and write these 7 points down. These 7 points are your answer to any question on irrigation management or sustainable agriculture.
Okay, let's run through them. Measure number 1.
A strict water management policy. The text says stage 1, the older part, should have protective irrigation, meaning just enough water to save the crop from dying, not flood irrigation. And stage 2 should focus on extensive irrigation of pasture lands, not water-intensive crops.
So stop treating the desert like it's a wetland in Bengal.
That's the essence of it. Measure number 2, crop pattern adjustment.
Please stop growing rice in the desert.
Please. The text suggests encouraging plantation crops like citrus fruits, oranges, kindness. They use water differently, they have deep roots, and they have high market value. You align the crop with the environment.
Okay. Measure number 3, the Warabandi system.
This is all about equity. Warabandi refers to the equal distribution of canal water in the command area of an outlet. It's a rotation system.
What does that prevent?
It prevents the head-reach farmers, the guys whose farms are right next to the canal, from taking all the water, leaving the tail-end farmers completely dry. It democratizes the water supply.
That's critical. Number 4, CAD programs.
Command area development. This is the engineering fix. It involves things like lining the water courses with concrete so water doesn't seep out into the ground before it even reaches the field.
Reducing waste.
And leveling the land so water spreads evenly instead of ponding in one area. It's all about efficiency.
Makes sense. Measure number 5, eco-development.
This goes back to the drought-prone area program concept we talked about. It means afforestation, planting shelter belts, which are rows of trees planted to stop the wind from causing erosion, and developing pasture land. This is especially important on the fragile land in stage 2 to stabilize the sand dunes so they don't just bury the canals.
And the last 2 seem more social and economic. Social sustainability and economic sustainability.
Yes. Social sustainability means giving financial and institutional support to the poor land allotters, the landless laborers who were given a small piece of land. You can't just give a poor person land in a desert and say, good luck.
They need help.
They need capital, seeds, tools, training. And economic sustainability means diversifying. Don't let the entire regional economy rely on just farming. build functional linkages with other sectors, dairy, food processing, markets, create a more resilient economy.
It's an incredibly comprehensive roadmap. It's not just a simplistic use less water. It's a complete systemic change.
And that is why this chapter is so powerful for the exam. It moves from the abstract definition of planning to the concrete, gritty reality of a canal in Rajasthan. It shows you the problem and it gives you the solution.
Now, this is the part of the show where we really earn our keep. We've covered the text, we understand the story. But how does this help you, the listener, crack the UPSC exam? Let's get into the simplified UPSC PYQ linkage.
This is where we connect the dots. It's the application. We need to take these concepts and plug them directly into actual exam questions. Let's start with Mains 2021 GS Paper 3, Question 4.
Okay, what was the question?
The question asked, how and to what extent would micro-irrigation help in solving India's water crisis?
Okay, so a normal student would just write definitions of drip irrigation and sprinkler systems. How do we use Chapter 9 to make that answer stand out?
You use the Indira Gandhi Canal as a powerful critique of flood irrigation. You start your answer by explaining how flood irrigation, as seen in the Canal Command area, led to waterlogging and salinity, the twin problems.
You're setting up the problem.
You're setting up the problem with a real-world example. Then you pivot. You say, to solve this, as suggested for the Canal Command area, we need strict water management. While the text doesn't explicitly scream drip irrigation in every paragraph, the logic of protective irrigation and crop pattern adjustment perfectly sets the stage for micro-irrigation as the solution.
So micro-irrigation becomes the technical tool to implement the sustainable policy the NCERT demands.
Precisely. You're using the problem from the NCERT to justify the solution in the question. It gives your answer so much more weight.
That's clever. What about Mains 2016 GS1 Q12 and Mains 2020 GS1 Q10? These were both about regionalism.
Regionalism is a hot topic, always. The question is often about whether uneven development is a cause of regionalism.
And how do we answer that?
You can blindly use the regional planning section of this chapter. You argue that the very existence of target area planning and target group planning is an admission by the state that development was uneven.
And then you bring in the Bharmaur case study.
100%. You use it as your evidence. You compare the Holi and Kani areas, which got the development, with the Tunda and Kudti areas, which remained backward. You show that even with government intervention, if the benefits are distributed unevenly, it breeds resentment and a sense of neglect.
And that resentment is the economic root of regionalism.
You've nailed it. That's the link you have to make.
I love that. Here's one I found really interesting. Mains 2015 GS1 Q19. It says, smart cities in India cannot sustain without smart villages.
That's a beautiful essay-style question, and you can answer it using the target area concept from this chapter. You argue that you cannot have these isolated islands of prosperity, the smart cities floating in a sea of backwardness, the drought-prone areas.
They're connected.
They are deeply connected. You need to integrate them. The text talks about functional linkages and watershed management. A smart city needs water, it needs food, it needs labor from its rural hinterland. If that village environment collapses, if the drought-prone area becomes a desert, the city will eventually die of thirst and hunger.
So you are essentially arguing for regional planning as the bridge that connects the smart city to the smart village.
That's the argument. And let's not forget Mains 2020 GS1 Q19. This was on tribal issues, tribal development in India, displacement versus rehabilitation.
Okay, so the usual answer here is to write about tribals being displaced by big dams, the Narmada, Bachau, and Dolan, for example.
Which is a valid and important point. But to make your answer unique, you can use the Bharmaur Gadi case study as a positive counterexample.
Development without displacement.
This was development in situ. They didn't move the Gadis out of their homeland. They brought infrastructure to the Gadis. It shows the examiner, both sides of the coin. It shows a balanced perspective.
And finally, a very recent one, Mains 2024 GS3 Q13. The question was, major challenges faced by Indian irrigation system.
This is a direct hit, a complete softball if you've read this chapter properly. You cite the Indira Gandhi Canal by name. You don't just say salinity is a problem.
What do you say?
You're right. As vividly demonstrated in the Indira Gandhi Canal Command area, particularly in Stage 2, the policy of intensive irrigation in arid regions has led to the twin environmental problems of waterlogging and soil salinity, questioning the long-term sustainability of such projects.
That is a topper-level sentence. It has specifics, it has analysis, it has the key words.
It adds so much authority when you can cite a specific case study from a standard textbook rather than just making a generic, vague point.
Absolutely. And for prelims.
For prelims, just watch out for the factual traps we mentioned. The Brundtland definition of sustainable development, the specific criteria for hill area development, that 600-meter number, the districts covered in the canal project. These are the details they will swap out in the options to trick you. Be alert.
So what does this all mean? We started this whole conversation with a paradox. Development creating crises.
And I think the text leaves us with a very clear message. Development isn't a straight line of progress. It's a complex balancing act.
And Indian planning has evolved.
It has. We went from just building big stuff in the 50s to targeting specific weak spots in the 70s to finally realizing in the 90s and beyond that we need to save the ecosystem or the whole development project collapses on itself.
The journey from the first 5-year plan to the sustainable development of the Sahara Desert is really a journey of learning from our mistakes.
It is, and for you, the listener, the ultimate takeaway is to see these chapters not as boring history, but as a toolkit of solutions. When you become an administrator, when you are an IAS officer in the field, you will be the one deciding between flood irrigation and protective irrigation in your district.
You will be the one implementing the next target area program.
That is the reality. This is not just abstract theory.
That is a very powerful thought. You aren't just studying for an exam. You are studying to run the country.
Ideally, yes. That's the goal.
We have covered a lot of ground today, from the institutional framework of the Planning Commission all the way to the nomadic trails of the Gadis, and finally to the green but salty fields of Rajasthan.
It's a dense chapter, but hopefully by breaking it down like this, we've made it digestible and, more importantly, usable.
Before we sign off, I just have to remind you one last time. If this deep dive helped you connect the dots, please subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP. It helps us immensely.
And if you are capable, please consider supporting us on Patreon. It keeps this content independent and high quality. And definitely join that private Telegram library for the premium notes and the model answers. Just DM us on the public channel to get in.
A huge thank you again to all our supporters. You are the wind in our sails. Keep learning, keep questioning, and always remember, planning without sustainability is just organized destruction.
Well put.
Let's crack this exam together. We'll see you in the next deep dive.